Hello, everyone. We're going to continue. So those of you who are standing near the door, if you can direct people inside the multipurpose room, that would be great. Right before we broke up into the groups, you will remember that we had open mic. And we have one other person who had signed up who didn't get to speak. Usually we just pick a few at each meeting, but all of you are special, as you know. So Earl is going to come up here. Earl, state your name, what you're doing in life right now, and you got your 2 minutes. And then the facilitators from each breakout session, please be ready to come and report out as soon as Earl finishes, okay? Earl.
Good morning. Afternoon. My name is Earl. I'm 20 years of age, and right now I'm attending the Hazelwood Doors to Success GED school to start my career and everything in culinary arts. But this is something special that's going on right now with everybody. You know, this is good, but a lot of people are missing the key point. You know, the thing is that you have to be the change that you want to see. It starts in the heart. You know, a lot of these people out here are just throwing stuff in the minds of these young people and expect them to just listen to it. You know, it has to get personal. This is not a race thing. This is a generational thing. The same generation of doing the same old thing. But, you know, I would love to ask a lot of people, what are y'all going to do about it? With the parents and the leaders. You know, I'm no better than nobody or nothing like that. You know, we all simply human. But it's what you're doing. You know, it starts at home. What are you teaching your kids? What are they learning? What are they looking at on TV? You know, I know you're not with them every time they go out into the community, but if those people did it with their kids, everybody would prosper in this. You know, and of course you got to put God first in everything. All praise to the Most High. It starts with that, in the heart. You got to get in tune, look on the inside. What are you teaching your kids? Control what they looking at on TV. If you think it's bad, turn it off. You gave birth to them. They don't have to go through the same thing that you went through. If you want to see change, you got to be the change that you want to see. All praise to the Most High.
Great, thank you, Mr. Earl. Now we are going to have the facilitators from the different groups report out. And who would like to go first? Okay. And you are family, right? And we hope that you found the breakout groups fruitful. You have a couple of minutes to report out. And you are family, right? And then who's the other family group from downstairs? Okay, great. So go ahead.
All right. Hey, how y'all doing? I'm Oni Harrison. Sorry. All right. We work with a group of families, and our first question was, what do you and others you know need to be safe, supported, and healthy in your homes and family? And we came up with 3 topics, three main answers that we kept getting. And our first main answer was need lack support of each elder, lift everyone up. Our second answer was better structure system will help us communicate better within our community. And our third one was lack of understanding of what family is. We are each other family. All right. And our question number 2 was, Given your experiences, what should be done to build stronger, more stable families in our community? We came up with three main answers that we kept getting to, and answer number one was better senses of self-family community through gatherings, teachings, and workshops. Answer number two, more events, social block parties, and sports. And answer number three, going places together that will uplift us. And thank you.
Thank you so much. Great job. Are you reporting out for the family group downstairs? Great.
So Brittany Farrell from Millennial Activists United was facilitating this conversation but had to take care of a personal matter. And so in addressing the same two questions, the first around what young people need to feel safe, there were three main themes. One was acceptance. The second was communication, open and honest communication. And the third was increased parental involvement. And then on the second portion of that question about what should be done in the community to build stronger, more stable families, there was a lot of talk about exposure, and so ensuring that young people could actually see kind of what was out there in the world, exposure to different opportunities, cultures, et cetera. The second was keeping youth close, and so ensuring that there's not a gap that's happening, but that we really maintain proximity. And the third, is to be accepting of differences and allowing children to be themselves. So again, that theme of acceptance coming back up, and young people not wanting to be chastised, but to be loved.
Thank you, Brittany. So from family, let's move to community. Where are the two facilitators from community? Okay.
Hi, I'm Jade.
I'm George.
We were communities, as was said. Our questions were, what do young people need to be safe, supported, and healthy in their families and homes? Given your experiences and those of the people you know, what should be done in your community to build stronger and more stable, wait, is that families? Families? What do young people need to be successful in their communities, and what issues, how can you address those issues in the community? The highlights of ours were a lot touched on like the beautification of our communities, how the youth can do things to be more involved in the community, like with the beautifying and revamping of the communities. Accountability, respect, and responsibility for oneself in the communities. Access to jobs and increasing education in the communities. Outlets for discussions about race and equality and exposure to different experiences. Grounding police and citizen relationships in the communities, and empathy and forgiveness in the communities. Those were the highlights of what we talked about in our groups. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Adrienne Denson. I apologize that I'm the one to present for you, but my community partner had to leave early. She has work in the community, so she asked me to report for her. Regarding the question, what is needed to have a safer, healthier community, number one was better community and police relations. Our group wanted programs that encourage and empower young people, and they wanted positive and accurate news stories. With regard to community issues that were most important, education came up, but it was also teaching the community their rights. Also, lack of nightlife for teenagers, and again, media coverage came up. That came up a number of times in our group. And finally, what can be done? One was more activities for young people. They wanted the creation of a nightlife, and they wanted affordable options. The other thing with regard to police and community relations, they wanted social gatherings, perhaps lunch, something to include food. And they wanted the police to be more courteous, to smile, to wave, to speak. Someone said they thought it's almost like it was a crime for the police to be able to smile. So they wanted something so simple as courtesy. And they wanted perhaps the police to engage in some kind of community service as well. Thank you. Media coverage. Yes, so they said a lot of times the media, they only present what bleeds, or if someone is acting up or speaking out or something in a negative way, they only cover the negative. So they wanted the media to cover the positive as well. They said a lot of people are out there peacefully protesting. That doesn't make the news. And so they wanted that to be included as well.
Thank you, Adrian. The last group was schools, and I know I worked with Paris. There you are, Paris. And then who's the other person who will report out for the group downstairs on schools? Okay, they had to leave, so Paris, just.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Paris Nathan. I'm a junior at McClure High School, and I'm with the Ferguson Youth Initiative. And I was the youth facilitator for the for the schools discussion. And I first just want to say that everyone that participated, it was really nice to hear everyone's views, because I heard a lot of things that I've never heard before. And that was just really nice and very insightful. And so thank you for everyone that participated. Give yourselves a hand. So one of the big things we talked about in the first group was race, and we stayed really within that topic, and that a lot of students felt that in the school they didn't have, that safe, open environment to express how they felt what did happen in August, and that we need to have an outlet for students to be able to express their opinions, because when you're out in the world, you have to, you can't just sit there mute. You have to. People are going to ask you what you think about things. And in relation to that, we talked about teachers not being really engaged in students. Like, they just come, clock in, clock out, get their paycheck, don't really care what happens to the student, whether in school or even when they leave school. And that's important because, the teacher is there, and you want to, you think of teacher as a role model, and you want to have that person that you can talk to and have a safe and trusting adult. And then in terms of how the school can be supported in the community, we talked about community centers and having more after-school activities, because unfortunately there are some students that aren't comfortable in their home environment, and school is their only outlet, and so they need that type of center or activity to keep them occupied, so they can, feel like they're making a positive change in their own lives. And along with that, we talked about work and study programs, that some students do have to choose between going to school or working, and that there should be more programs and services where students can work and at the same time study, so they can prepare themselves to be independent by working, but then at the same time educate themselves for the future. And last thing that we talked about in our last group was students need to ask for things, because even though teachers sometimes, they state the obvious, but there are some things that aren't obvious, and students have to make those known, because not everyone thinks the same way, and everyone has a different perspective. So if students don't ask for it, they're not necessarily going to get what they need or even what they want. So if you don't do that, then you're not really helping yourself in the first place. And you have to help yourself before you can expect anyone else to help you. Thank you.
So we want to thank everyone. I wanted to ask, just offer a space to see if commissioners had any particular reflections or questions, things they wanted to probe. I know we've had people come up in succession, but there may be reflections or thoughts that you've had in the sessions that you wanted to share. So, anyone?
I sat in particular, I'm thinking about the first session I sat in, which was about community. And I think it was just reported out. And in these words, it is empathy and forgiveness. And I think those of us, I don't know, I know, Rasheen, you were in the group with, you and I were in that group, and there may have been others, but I don't think you understand how extraordinary, it wasn't just forgive each other and be empathetic. It was at a very, very different level that may be, it would outpace just about any adult group I've ever sat in, how they'll lead us out of this.
I just want to reiterate my thanks again from the beginning, and all of our thanks. I was talking to someone, and part of the reason why, in particular in the protests, I've been trying to physically stay very close to young people is because I know that you guys don't come with an agenda, right? All you guys come with is your truth, and you brought that here, and we have learned from it and will benefit from it because this doesn't happen without that kind of truth. So thank you for being honest. Thank you for being forthright. Thank you for, in whatever format you decided to do it, sharing your wisdom with us, because that's what we really need to learn from.
I just turned 40. I feel extremely old in this particular group, but I was very struck by the same comments that I had at 16 and 17. Are the same things that you're saying now as well. And I just want to say that what I'm passing on is not okay. And to hear the same things expressed that I remembered makes me angry. And it's not okay. And that's the thing that I think I'm leaving with the most. I also wanted to say that tolerance is not a word that we should even use. That is not where we're coming from, and that came across to those that talked to me as well. And then there are many who wanted to give me lots of feedback after the session's over. So I just wanted to say that I'm open to that, and this gives me a new energy. This is the first day in a long time that I have felt like I'm in place where I need to be. So the media won't capture this, and that's okay, but this is my yes. And this is exactly why I took the job, was because of your voices today. So thank you for helping me to fulfill my purpose. And I am listening, and I'm in until it's done. So thank you. You've really, really engaged me in a different way today.
Thank you, Debbie. As we make a bit of transition, I also want to just thank a few groups who were very helpful to us. I know they're already gone. But want to thank the Millennial Activists United, who helped to facilitate a couple of the groups. Choral Fellows, where are you? The choral crew, who has been helping to facilitate and register and all this kind of stuff. Just wave or something. I want to say thank you to them for their support and help on today. We also have representatives, as you heard, from the Ferguson Youth Initiative, who have been really helpful to us facilitating and turning people out. So if you're with FYI, just wave at us. Thank you very much for your help. You all have done, so people didn't get that it was just, it's not just youth voice, but it's also youth leadership, and you all provided facilitation and engagement, and you made this meeting possible, so thank you very much. Right now, we're making a transition to talk about some business and administrative elements, so I'm going to kick to Rich to frame some of that up for us.
Thank you, Starsky, and let me add my thanks to all of you for participating. I tell you, it was incredibly inspiring, and we heard from voices everywhere from 9-year-old Abraham, who I think had to leave, but his birthday is today. And he came with his dad and his teenage sisters and some others from their neighborhood, and they came out today. And Abraham spoke up in one of the groups and talked about his dreams and his fears. To LaDonna, a senior at McClure High School, who talked about equality and about the challenge of unification and how her dream was how we could come together. So for all of us up here, and we hope for all of you, we hope this has been the kind of inspiration that you heard Bethany speak about so clearly and so forcefully. We're going to shift Now to first report out from the outcomes of our first 3 meetings at a very high level and a very executive level summary, right? Is that what we're doing, Rebecca? And specifically with a bit more detail on the last meeting, which focused on municipal courts. Then we're going to segue to do our administrative work on our budget and to review that with the commission. And then we'll have brief reports from leadership of 2 working groups, our Citizen Law Enforcement Working Group and our Municipal Court Reform and Governance Working Group, and they will be prepared to speak. And so that will be the balance of our meeting. So Rebecca, thank you for leveling us.
So young people, we invite you, certainly if you are interested, to listen to the administrative workings of the commission and hear where we have been. But we also understand if you have other commitments on your Saturday. So we welcome you to do what is best for you, recognizing that we enjoy staying in community with you, but also wanting you to have the opportunity to explore other activities for the day if you need to do so. We thank you so much for joining us. We could not have done this day without you. Yes. And we intend to stay in relationship with you. Happy birthday, Abraham. We'll give another 15 seconds or so for transition. So commissioners and audience participants, I understand that this day has been a bit longer than we anticipated. There was so much richness, and we certainly don't want to curb that, but in the spirit of knowing that this is going a little longer than we anticipated, I'm going to move through this quickly. So one of the things that I've been tasked with is providing you just a brief process overview and highlights from our input findings. Can we turn this down even further? Is this it? Okay. So our first session was on December 1st, and the commissioners got a chance to meet the community. They established guiding principles, and our community discussion was focused on what the community's priorities were, what the community's hopes and concerns were. We then met again the following week. Our second session was on December 8th. There, our focus was on citizen law enforcement interactions and relations. We got presentations on police policy and practice, police training, and rights violations. And then we had a community discussion that focused on community policing, racial profiling, and use of force. We met for a third time the very next week on December 15th, and the focus of that meeting was really about community municipal court systems. We had presentations on court operations, violations, and youth impacts, and also how fines and fees from municipal courts really support municipal revenues. And then we had a discussion on municipal court issues and improvements, asking the community to share with us what their experiences were and what their suggestions were for ways that we can improve our municipal court system. Today's meeting has been about youth well-being and impact, and we've had presentations from both Brittany and Rasheen on youth protests and the effects of the crisis on youth. And we discussed youth well-being in the context of families, schools, and communities. We'll be having another meeting too, and I'm going to end with that. That's on the second meeting of the month, which will be on January 20th. And that's going to focus on educational inequities and child well-being. So you'll recall from our first meeting, what I'm calling our kickoff meeting, we had about 204 participants. And we asked the community to tell us, what are the main priorities for you? And what we heard was our #1 priority is citizen law enforcement relations, right? Followed by municipal court systems and governance. And then we said, okay, and in the area of disparities, you tell us what are your chief priorities. And you'll see the voting priorities by percentage, but what really came out from the community at large of participants were these things. Educational disparities, it's important for the commission to focus on. Economic disparities and economic opportunity are key, and then really addressing more broadly the issues of racial and ethnic relations in our community and the need for reconciliation and improvement. So within that context, we said, okay, so tell us what your greatest issues of concern were. And in education, we heard school funding, academic achievement, and the ways in which schools are administered matter. With regard to economic opportunity, the chief issues that rose up were employment, rebuilding Ferguson, and banking and access to capital. In racial and ethnic relations, what came up for us was communication and interracial interactions, racial divisions, and African Americans' lack of political power. And then there were some general issues that came up in the context of citizen law enforcement interactions and our commission process, making sure that our process is transparent and open. Right, and that our recommendations are really going to have value in terms of systems reform in the community. We asked the community to tell us their hopes for the commission, and we heard we really need the commission to be bold, transformational. We need to have a process of accountability and transparency with the community. We want to end up with better law enforcement practices, you know, what should come out of all of this work that we're doing. We want to have greater community well-being, so the community as a whole should be better off as a result of the work that the commission and the community are doing together. We want to see key reforms in the criminal justice system, and we really want to see a push to improve educational outcomes. So that's what we heard from our community participants. Now, as we move to the sort of second meeting with its focus on citizen law enforcement, we had even more attendees, so more than 120 or 30 more. So we had 336 participants in that second meeting. And the focus there was on three things: use of force, racial profiling, and community policing. And there, we asked for each one of those topics, tell us what the issues are and tell us what some key improvements are. And so this is just a sort of quick synopsis. For use of force, we heard, you know, it's excessive, it's disrespectful, it's biased, it's preconceived, it's fear-based, it just does not work. And for use of force improvements, we heard focus on police practices, possibly special investigators in police incidents when we're looking at excessive use of force. That we've also got to ground in community practices so that youth and police relationships improve. And then we heard, you know, part of this too is legal aid and defense, that people who feel like they have been victimized by excessive use of force really need to have access to quality legal defense. And what's that look like, especially for poor communities? And so it becomes important for us to focus there. In terms of racial profiling, the issues that came up were that, you know, it is not uncommon. In fact, it is a widespread practice. It has economic impacts because people who are unfairly detained, arrested, and those sorts of things, it has consequences to their ability to maintain their livelihoods and well-being. It is a community issue that it's not just a police issue. There are ways in which community bias a racial bias are part of communities, and we are conditioned around racial perceptions, and we need to address the larger community bias issue, and that ultimately racial profiling reinforces racism. And then when we said, well, community, tell us about what are improvements that you think we need to focus on, we heard we've got to improve police practices, we've got to limit the economic hardships and damage that come from being unfairly targeted. We have to increase police screening and training so that our officers have the tools that they need to be able to make better kinds of choices. We've got to enforce the existing law. Missouri has racial profiling laws in the books, so we have to do a better job of enforcing them, and we really have to address the issue of broad, widespread community bias. So it's not just a police thing. And then our last area of focus in terms of community discussions was on community policing. And what we heard about community policing in terms of the issues that were focused on, really a lot of time spent on training, a lot of time spent on police practices, and a lot of time spent on disrespectful and aggressive policing. And those things can damage the relationship. So part of the beauty of community policing is that it really focuses on enhancing and strengthening relationship, right? And what can damage relationship. And then we heard about improvements. So we heard, you know, we've got to strengthen citizen police connections. We've got to improve youth interactions with law enforcement. We've got to, again, enhance officer training, reform police practices. And at the end of the day, this doesn't happen cheaply, right? So there's got to be a commitment of funding to really make this happen. And then our last meeting, we focused on municipal court system issues. That meeting had about 213 participants from the community. And again, we broke into small groups where we could discuss people's municipal court experiences, the issues and concerns they had as a result of those experiences, and then suggested improvements. And so the top sort of 3 issues that came out were court operations and accessibility. So we heard court hours are often not convenient. They're not frequent enough, that warrants are issued hastily, people are jailed too quickly. Defendants often lack legal representation. If they aren't arrested, then they don't get a public defender, but they may still need legal advising. And then there are too many courts. It's just the system is just too big. It's too unwieldy. From economic impacts, we heard people can't afford the fines and fees that they're often saddled with, that poor people are targeted, and that fees and fines are a major source of municipal revenue. And so there's this sort of perverse relationship and dynamic with criminalizing your population in order to stay economically solvent. Right? And then the last issue that was really sort of a main issue that came up was racial inequality, that racial profiling and discrimination make people of color targets, even in the court system, that blacks are disproportionately represented and caught up in the court system, that people of color, because they are arrested and stopped and things, detained more often or have more bench warrants, ultimately are paying greater fines than other communities, and that not enough prosecutors and judges are people of color. And so there's a question about fairness if you don't see yourself represented. And then the improvements that were recommended was, the first one was legislative action about lowering the % of revenue that municipalities receive from fines and fees from 30% to another number. And then giving more options for fines and fees. So considering time-banking community services alternatives, implementing and communicating payment plan options, because some courts actually have payment plan options, but it's not well known. Having municipalities adopt the same fines. So a fine could be one thing in one place and another thing in another place. And providing centralized payment options so it's easy to actually comply with the law and with the ticketing and the consequences of that. So court accessibility and options was another one, extending the hours of operations for courts, providing public defenders if there's an arrest, providing legal advisors if there's not an arrest, but so that people still need legal advice, making sure that they are available, and refraining from jailing people for minor violations. That's a key step that we should take. And then the last one was accountability. And what we heard there was perhaps we need to disincorporate municipalities that abuse their citizens. So something else to think about, and that we really needed to stop racial profiling in the courts and by police and have strategies for doing so. So those are the kinds of high-level insights that came out of our last meeting. And then this is just a reminder to you that the very next meeting is on Tuesday, January 20th. We're keeping up that pace. And that, again, there the focus will be on educational inequities and child well-being. So it will be at 5:30, I believe. And Lorna? What time is it?
5 o'clock at the Westview Middle School.
Westview Middle School.
1950 Nemnich, N-E-M-N-I-C-H Road. It's in the Riverview Gardens.
So 5 o'clock, Westview Middle School in the Riverview Gardens District. So you can go to our website to find all of the information, the report that came out for community input if you want to see much more detailed information, and the notice for the next meeting. So thank you. I think Bethany, you're next. So I'm going to turn it over to Bethany, who will be presenting to the commission next.
Just wanted to give a bit of context. So the next thing we'll be presenting on our agenda is our budget for the commission's work. And again, this is one of the things that we wanted to make sure that our managing director, who comes on officially this week on January 15th, has the opportunity to give input on. As consistent with the values that you saw as outlined in our first meeting, the things that the community said about what they expected of the commission and concerns for the commission, critical things that were taken into consideration when we built the budget were the capacity to be as transparent as possible, open meetings, transcription, videotaping, making meeting information accessible. Number two, independence. So you will see that the budget builds and constructs a staffing structure that is independent of any governmental sources, of any governmental assets as far as staffing is concerned, so that we may be actually independent and follow where the community guides us and where our research guides us as far as policy solutions or recommendations may need to go. And finally, robust community engagement. So you will see that it's built into the budget a significant amount of capacity so that we continue to have meetings publicly. All meetings are public, and so we can continue to do this listening. So in as much as we heard those community concerns in that December 1st meeting, we constructed a budget to be responsive to that. The other thing that we did, so responsive to these issues of transparency, community engagement, and independence. The other thing that we did was had the opportunity to benchmark against commissions that are like this one that come out of similar circumstances. So we looked at anything from the Macomb Commission to the Cincinnati Better Together group to the Kerner Commission in order to benchmark where these resources are allocated and how they may lie, and what the calibration of our support is. And what we found and what we've constructed is that we have constructed a budget for the length of time that will be gathered in this work, and the way that we're going about it, it is not only competitive, but it's also a fraction of what some of those dollars would have been, particularly in inflation-adjusted dollars to come into where we are. So we're pleased at the work that's gone into it. We thank Bethany for the eyes that she's been able to put on it, and those who have been helpful in wrapping our heads around it and providing additional support so that we could keep it as low as it is. So thank you.
Just three quick additional points to build on what Starsky has said, and we're going to have the commission stay here so they can see the PowerPoint presentation, and then we go to the discussion and the report outs of the groups. We'll move back up here. But the first thing I'd say is that the revenue sources you will see is a mix of private and public funding. Almost a third is anticipated to come from private sources, which reflects the community and particularly foundation interest in this work, and we expect that that will be significant and important. And while not all of the revenues are in, we do see paths and anticipation of where the sources will come from under each sector. Secondly, I would, building on the values discussion, we're committed to do this right. And to do this right takes resources. If you're going to be independent, if you're going to bring the best minds and have the best research and have extraordinary and robust community engagement, you have to do that with investment. It just doesn't happen. These meetings don't just happen. There are costs to them. So we're committed as a commission, we're certainly committed as commission leadership to do this right and to make sure that we give it the resourcing that it's needed, because of the third point, and that is these problems are very complex and very difficult. They didn't occur overnight. They're not going to be solved overnight. And so if we're going to be resolute about this as a community, we have to be resolute about funding this and doing this right, because existing structures and existing institutions haven't resolved these matters, or we wouldn't be here. So those are my three opening comments, and I would echo Starsky's gratitude to Bethany for the work she's done on this. So with that, we will ask you to make the presentation, Bethany.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rich and Starsky, and to the commission. I'll direct everyone's attention to the front screen as I go through the slides. This first one, an investment in the region. Just a reiteration of our charge. We are charged to engage all voices and inform the community in real time through community meetings, data, and outreach. Produce a thorough and wide-ranging and unflinching report. It's straight from our charge statement that has to be actionable and focused on the root causes of the unrest set in motion by the events of August 9th in Ferguson. And third, our charge is to do two things: elevate awareness of the issues that we're talking about in the tale of two cities we heard earlier, and mobilize for action to address inequities, disparity, particularly a lot of momentum around racial and ethnic relations in the region. The values have already been echoed, but again, part of the budget process, and I'm really happy to see young people staying for this session, you always want to follow the money. That tells you a lot about what's happening, and so transparency is very important. Therefore, this detail that we're going into is so that you know how to ask great questions, and so you know where the money is coming from and where it's going. Accountability, civic engagement, and sustainability are also values that we uphold, and this is part of how we present those values to you. So what will it take to meet this charge due September 15th? And we're doing it in the process. One, it's already been mentioned, independence and continuity. When you have staff that are independently working, they also go in between meetings to make sure that all the input, all the feedback, all the sessions, the art, the poetry works together to be able to produce a final product that is worth the caliber of the discussion that we're having. Number two, a blending of public and private funds at the total amount of $1.475 million is what has been committed that Rich and Starsky alluded to earlier. It also takes financial investment. So on the expense side, $1.36 million, which is about 62 cents per individual in the region. That's how much that would break down to. It also will take qualified individuals who work full-time, more than full-time, that's a relative word now, at an accelerated pace in two ways: to get loaned executives to this work and to hire staff for this work. And there has been and will continue to be significant in-kind, professional, and volunteer services. So this is what we feel it will take to make this happen. We want to let you know in terms of transparency that this is a responsible budget, as has been alluded to earlier. An independent local civic organization has benchmarked the salaries, and those salaries within the nonprofit labor market are falling between that midpoint and some positions even low to midpoint. So this is consistent with that. Second, we've also budgeted against the comparable commissions. There'll be a slide to go into more detail so that you can see that. And overall, our budgets are less than or comparable to other commissions. I want to show you now this pie chart of how the money is broken down. We will see salaries and benefits, professional fees, operations, community engagement, and research and reporting. So within those numbers, just to break down a little bit more specifically, in the salary and benefits line, those are 5.33 FTEs that are the managing director, the assistant director, the senior PR community relations director, or senior PR communications director, senior policy and research director, 2 work group managers for those teams that we will be engaging, and a civic engagement specialist, including benefits. For professional fees, this includes audit. We want to make sure that we are transparent about how the money is spent, so we have budgeted for an audit, for legal support, for communications, and other consultant resources. In terms of operations, which is the back end of what we have to do, you have telecommunications, copying, equipment rental, mileage, technology, and fees for hosting, modifying, and updating our website. Next is community engagement, and this is the most critical part of the work that we're responding to. This includes the cost of commission meetings. 3 meetings in 2014 were at $13,600, and moving forward, we're able to have these meetings at a reduced cost in 2015 at $9,500 per meeting. This includes the AV costs, transcription, rental, copying, videotaping, and security. All of those costs are incorporated into this budget. In addition to that, we know that we'll have work groups that are already starting and more to come, 2 per month, 6 groups at 8 months, and that is $1,000 per meeting. And then community events. This summer in particular, we want to go out. We want to make sure that what happens and what is communicated in the fall is no surprise to anyone. So we will go out into the region to begin to have a discussion, and we need community events to do that. That's incorporated into that cost. Finally, For research and final report, that cost is associated with the final report of the commission. That includes design, production, and distribution. And those costs also are connected to legislative and policy issues that we will have to craft. Young people today said at the end of the day, this isn't just one issue, but policy needs to change to make this happen, and so those costs are incorporated. You will note that this does not take into account the hundreds of thousands of dollars of in-kind services and volunteer time. We want to account for that as well, and should there be additional funding that is provided to us, that could be designated for the purpose of implementing commission recommendations to ensure sustainability. So how does this compare to other commissions? I want you to take a look at the screen as just a glance to be able to show what's the comparison. So up at the top is the Ferguson Commission at 1.3 plus for 365 plus days of work. And then the next comparison is to 1965 with the LA Uprisings, the Macomb Commission. There, for 100 days at that time, it was $250,000. But in today's numbers, it was $1.8 million for 100 days of work, okay? Also, it was very heavily staffed, 29 staffers, 16 clerks, 26 consultants over 100 days. The Kerner Commission is another comparison point in 1967, $1.65 million for 365 days in those dollars. But in today's dollars, that's roughly $11.6 million, which includes some pretty substantive funding from a national foundation. It has also been noted here that funding was a challenge, and as funding was a challenge, the ability to get work done and the credibility of that commission was also challenged. So we want to take from the lessons learned and be sure that as we have the infrastructure to undergird the weight of the charge that we've been given to complete. And lastly, it might be a little low here, Cincinnati Community Action Now, 2001, has a similar genesis to St. Louis, 1.498 million over 2 years, and to date, between 2001 and 2010, they have committed an investment of $8,222,259. So that's the benchmarking that has been done for your consideration. St. Louis Positive Change Model will be a roadmap that lays the groundwork for a more just and equitable St. Louis. And in order to get the detailed, defined, what is it that we will deliver, we are going to rely on the wealth of knowledge and expertise that is generated from commissioners' expertise, from work groups, from commission meetings, from events and other forms of engagement that will shape the specific deliverables of this work. So with that, that's the presentation of the budget. Thank you so much for your thoughtfulness and patience. I will turn it back over to the co-chairs at this time.
Reassemble back up front, and we'll see what questions we have. Yes, thank you, Bethany. So to follow proper procedure, let me ask first for a motion to adopt this budget, to get it on the floor, and then I need a second, and then we will open for discussion and any questions of Bethany from the commissioners. Can I have a motion, please? Okay, Felicia makes the motion. Is there a second? Second from Rose and Grayling. So the motion is made and seconded. So now the floor is open for discussion or questions from commissioners. I will say you all have had a chance to review this in draft form. You've had an opportunity to pose questions one-on-one to Bethany or to the co-chairs. In addition, this material is now public record with it being proposed to the commission, so it is on the website or will be very shortly if it's not in more detail even than Bethany presented it, the same detail presented to you all in the summary form. So we're happy now to open the floor for discussion. Please get a microphone so the public can hear you if you have a question or a comment.
Oh, there it was. My question is, I was just wondering, the 365 days, how are we calculating that? Is that work after September 29th, or what's included in that?
November was when we began the commission. The specific date was I want to say the 17th. So going back from that time until our charge is complete was about 1 year's time.
The budget also, the budget also allows for keeping on some critical key staff through December 31. So that would be even, so as you talk about plus, that would consider this entire calendar year. So while the report will come out September 15, we recognize that there will be work of translation, communication, and implementation that would need to go through at least through the end of the year. So there's allowance for that.
You touched base on the implementation part. Is that part of this budget, or will that be a separate budget?
That is not a part of this budget. We do expect that there may be additional supports that come in. There is, as you see, the budget is not only balanced, there is surplus in the budget, that those additional dollars could be used for implementation, and any additional dollars that are received above that, which are those dollars that are required for the actual implementation of the scope of work for the staff, could also be used for implementation efforts. I think there's about $100,000 surplus, am I right? So that could be used for implementation and any additional dollars.
Thank you for the question, Scott. Certainly from Starsky's and my perspective, and literally from the first time before we began talking about this, we began talking about implementation and translation. This is a critical part of our work, what happens after the report is done. And so I think the commission in total, and some commissioners individually, will be spending a lot of time thinking about this, thinking about structure, about process, about accountability, about metrics, about how you build into this process an ongoing focus on the issues raised out of the Ferguson Commission report. We provided to you all and to the public on the website the reporting on the Cincinnati Collaborative, which Bethany referred to, and that multi-year funding stream funded accountability and implementation and translation. So we'll study that and other practices in order to be able to make sure we focus on this. This will be a key differentiator for what we do versus other commissions. So thank you for raising the question. Felicia.
Thank you. I just had a question in terms of staffing. Do we have a timeline for when you believe you may have the benefit of a staff?
So I come on the 15th, and my first goal is to begin to design the job descriptions to both those job descriptions that are available online at St. Louis, wrong organization, that's IHN, stlpositivechange.org, still in transition, to begin that process as soon as possible because we need the staffing on board. So it's coming soon. Thank you.
Bethany, could you talk a little bit about how the, I saw the mention in there about the loaned executive program. Could you talk a little bit about how that will work? Because I do think there's a lot of interest at companies at contributing to the effort, and I want to get it out there what we're looking for.
Okay. Well, I'm a prime example of a loaned executive, so what happens is that a corporation, an individual, a nonprofit that would be willing to loan the resource that fits the job descriptions that will come out within these positions would go through an hiring or an interview process just like everyone else would, except that we would want to make sure it's the right fit, and if it's the right fit, we'd love to have that support. It helps us to really reduce cost. It helps us to get up to speed very quickly because these are individuals who know how to ready, set, go, and we do have an urgency, so that is definitely a viable option for us.
This is just a comment. I like how the budget aligns with the commission's charge and also the commission's values. And I particularly like the slide that refers to how this budget compares to other commissions in the past and how you've translated it into real dollars. So I commend you for that.
Are there other comments, questions, or unreadiness? Okay. Seeing none, then we'll open the floor. There's already been moved and properly seconded that we pass the budget as presented. We've had discussion. All those in favor, please notify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. So we are pleased to have presented a budget as noted, aligned with our values and consistent with our charge. That is, again, has already been, I believe, posted to our website for public accountability and transparency. So you all who have stayed have access to that as well. We'll now make some transition to a couple of reports that we have from our work groups on the work that they have been doing, and from those leaders. First, I believe we'll go to citizen law enforcement. Actually, first we'll go to municipal courts and governance. Our co-chairs for that work group are Reverend Tracy Blackman and Mr. T.R. Carr. They have been able to assess the environment around some of our that's been going on since our last meeting, where we focus on municipal courts and governance. And there's a good amount of activity that they want to bring us up to speed on. So I yield the floor to Reverend Blackman and Commissioner Carr.
Our committee initially met this last week for the first time. We're ramping up. We have a lot of information. We have a lot more committee meetings to schedule. One thing that we will say, this is just, we've decided to move forward in an attitude of fact-finding to discover some facts and information to present that to the commission. And we'll be continuing to meet with individuals that are involved in the area of municipal courts, as well as public that's impacted by the municipal court. First thing we'll say is I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on television, so again, don't hold me accountable for every legal statement that I made. One thing we will say is that the issue of municipal courts, as we heard last time, is complex. It's involved. There are, in fact, 82 municipal courts in St. Louis County. 3 of those municipal courts are operated by St. Louis County, one in the north, one in the mid-county, one in South County. 79 municipal courts are in fact operated by cities. Now remember that we have some 90-odd cities in St. Louis County. The nature of court cases is complex, and it can be potentially confusing. The question that was raised at our last one is, are municipal courts quasi, are they criminal or are they civil? Well, it's fairly complex. On one hand, municipal courts are in fact civil. Remember that cities are incorporated. Every time we have a city, it's incorporated, and therefore it's an entity, and a fine owed to a entity is a civil matter. At the same time, courts are quasi-criminal. The language in a number of Missouri Supreme Court cases has affirmed the quasi-criminal nature of municipal courts. Traffic violations, for example, are in fact criminal proceedings. We would note that cities cannot sentence individuals to jail. Cities cannot sentence individuals less than 17 to jail. Cities can hold you for a day in a facility, but criminal cases are transferred from municipalities to St. Louis County. The jail is in Clayton. They pay about $50 a day when somebody is moved to Clayton. The confusion, this is where it gets kind of interesting. I understand, I'm a faculty member, I teach American government, I've done all this stuff. It goes back to William Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of England. When our republic was founded, we had to decide how do we interpret our laws. We immediately, since we were found under the English tradition, we turned to Blackstone's commentaries. Blackstone commented that, in his view, and there's some fuzziness about it, that unless an offense applied to everybody in a larger political entity, it would be a civil offense, not a criminal offense. And that would tend to argue that unless a municipal law applied to everybody in the state of Missouri, for example, then it would be civil and not criminal. So that did hold sway, and consequently that interpretation was applied. At the same time, the Missouri Supreme Court over a number of years have held that municipal courts are both civil and in fact quasi-criminal. So there is some murkiness, there is some fuzziness, but it's clear that they do have that criminal jurisdiction. A couple of issues that were raised, and these are important issues. One was that legal advice is typically not provided in a municipal court. I know if any of you have had the privilege of going to a municipal court, paying a fine, anybody, I won't ask for volunteers, people don't know what's going on. You're there, the judge is down front, the court recorder's there, there are a lot of people in the room, people are confused. There's no mechanism to just give the individual information about what the process is, what the procedures are. Some judges do in fact provide that, and when somebody calls down front, some judges don't. It's important to note that only when a specific jail term is recommended, is it mandatory to provide a public defender. And since municipal courts do not typically deal with jail sentences, it's not required that they provide a public defender. Now, we have met with a municipal judge, Frank Vatterott, who serves as a judge for a number of municipalities. And one argument, one reform that's being considered is to allow a mechanism for not a lawyer to be present necessarily in the back of the courtroom, but an individual who can provide some information to citizens as they enter the court to know what the procedures are, what their options are. Now, this gets really murky because there are certain niceties involved in terms of legal establishments. Once I give you legal advice, who can give legal advice? Is it an attorney? Is it somebody else? What kind of releases have to be signed? So it's a fairly complex kind of an issue. But that is one reform that's being taken. Another issue that we talked about is traffic fines are a significant source of revenue. Why are traffic signs a source of revenue? It's because as tax bases decline in a municipality, they lose the ability to provide services, and they look around for a source of revenue, and traffic fines and municipal court fees become an important source of revenue. The important thing for us to keep in mind is that municipal courts are a creature of local government. They are created by elected officials, by the mayor, by the city council. It's typically the mayor and the city council that appoint the judge. It's typically the mayor and the city council that appoint the prosecuting attorney. And so the courts do, in fact, respond to the political wishes of the elected officials. Now, one of the issues is that we believe that some of these municipalities, and it's the litigation has been filed by the Attorney General, are exceeding the amount. 30% is the amount in state law. As we heard at our last meeting, that law is poorly written. It doesn't say who's responsible for enforcing. It doesn't specify what happens once you go above the 30%. It doesn't specify what happens once you send the excess amount into either the school district or the state. And we know that a number of burbs have been fairly aggressive in securing revenue. All you have to do is drive on Interstate 70 by the airport, and you'll find 5 or 6 police cars from the city of St. Anne busy writing tickets. You know, at one time, Charlac was writing tickets on I-170 for the, 200-foot stretch of the interstate, generating revenue. So there's some real issues there. And that's an issue that needs to be addressed. And their legislation has been proposed in Missouri to lower that to 10%. It remains to be seen how effective that effort will be, but it will in fact reduce, have an impact on court procedures. A third issue that we heard was these bench warrants. And bench warrants are basically issued based on a failure to appear. If you don't pay the fine, you're given a court date. If you don't appear for the court, then a bench warrant is issued for your arrest, and you're given a new court date. If you don't appear, again, another warrant's issued, and first thing I know, a small traffic fine, the cost increases periodically over time. Then at some point in time, you're picked up by a police officer for some other traffic offense, and they find out you have a number of bench warrants, and by state law, the officer has no choice but to arrest you and take you in. And one of the problems we have is the round-robin effect that we were told about, is that you get bench warrants in multiple jurisdictions. And then once they take you in, then you have to go to all these different jurisdictions. It creates, it's really unreasonable, and it is really, in our belief, my belief, I believe yours as well, I don't speak, is that it's an unfair. It's an unfair round robin. There needs to be some mechanism to deal with that round robin. There has been some efforts to create a compact between municipalities to reduce that round robin, but nothing has been done to date. One thing we would also say is that state court, municipal court costs are in fact defined by state law. They're pretty well laid out. Some of those fines must go to the state, a small portion, but there is some room for additional fines that municipalities can impose, and what you find is that any number of municipalities do in fact impose additional fines. There's lack of uniformity in some of these additional costs. There's lack of uniformity in traffic fines, and that creates some real issues. So the issues involves these court costs. Can there be a payment plan imposed? Can there be a mechanism for community service to overcome the issues related to bench warrants? What we would say is that the current Missouri law is 30% of operating revenue from traffic fines. It's kind of undefined as to exactly what you count in that 30%. There's some vagaries in the law. There are some vagaries in terms of enforcement, and we'll wait and see what happens with the 10%. One thing we would say is that municipal court structure is a creation of local government. Local government was created by the people, and they're maintained by the individual citizens. The local governments can be disincorporated by a vote of the residents. Now, what would be the impact on these local municipalities if the 10% cap is adopted by the state legislature? That remains to be seen. But we do know that it would impinge on the operating revenues for a number of states. I know Tracy has a comment about the issue of
I can
fines.
do it.
Yeah, a couple more.
So I'm not a lawyer either, and I think sometimes that's helpful. What we found out is that whether or not they lower it to 10% or not, that there are a lot of municipalities that are out of compliance at 30%. And we know that because of the lawsuit that was filed, but we also know it because they have not been reporting annually as they're supposed to. My pushback on that is you cannot expect citizens to obey the law, and you don't obey the law. That's just how I feel about that. And so if at that 30% cutoff, the law says if you don't report annually, that you immediately lose your ability to operate in that function. And even though this lawsuit has been now brought into play here, that means that for a significant amount of time, many of these small municipalities were out of compliance with the law. They were breaking the law. I would like to see us push that issue, because in my opinion, and I won't drag TR with me unless he comes willingly, in my opinion, every ticket that they issued while they were out of compliance, that money should be returned. I know that's drastic, but it just doesn't fly that you have a law and it's not written well, and no one knows who's supposed to enforce it, and no one knows how it's supposed to work, therefore we won't worry about it. That doesn't work. It doesn't work for regular citizens, and it shouldn't work for government as well. And I suggest that if that money had to go back, some of this problem would go away, because the reason they're doing it is because these municipalities cannot sustain themselves without that traffic money. And I suggest that if you cannot sustain yourself without that traffic money, then perhaps you don't need to be an independent municipality. And so I would like to see us, in the interest of transparency, look at that and call into question those that are involved in that. What TR has outlined for you is definitely some confusion and quagmires that we're going to have to get into as it pertains to the law, but it also points to the economic disparities that are in our neighborhoods and in our regions. Because in reality, if you can afford to go to a traffic court, or if you can afford to get a lawyer, then some of this goes away for you immediately. And it's those who cannot afford those resources who end up filling up these municipal courtrooms when they are stopped. Something else that happened in our conversation with the judges that I want to bring out, even though it goes into another work group, it doesn't come into this work group, is the difference between what the police do and what the municipal court does. So sometimes when people are stopped, they don't get just one ticket, but they may get 6 tickets, or they may get 7 tickets, and then the judge has to deal with whatever comes into the courtroom around that. So even though we're dealing with these separately, they are intertwined, and I'm hoping as a commission, I understand that we don't have the power to change that, but we do have the power to call people on it, and I think that's what the community expects us to do. It's unacceptable, and if we have to live by the law as citizens, then they certainly have to live by the law if they're going to enforce it. Thank you.
Why don't we open for questions from commissioners? You've got a very thorough discussion here, and I think you've raised some very interesting issues, and I know we are a bit over time, but this is important work. This is about action that we need to be taking and considering, and so I'm going to ask the indulgence of the commission to explore this and the citizen law enforcement in a bit more depth and not rush it unduly. So let me open the floor for questions. Rose?
Thanks very much for your presentation. I have to say it was upsetting, but I'm glad we have more information. I need to know what the next steps are for the commission, because I agree that we do need to move forward on this, and I don't know whether or not it requires information or legal advice, or whether there are things that we can do within the parameter of the commission.
What TR and I have discussed so far, again, we've only met once, and then we had a meeting with a municipal court judge who was gracious enough to grant us that time. So our next steps as a working group is to begin to form some community input into this group. We've talked about expanding to a size of about 6. Did we say about 6? We didn't want to go too large. We can always add, but you can't ask anybody to leave. We wanted that to be representative of someone from the court system and someone from someone that represents the court system outside of a judge, and then a couple of community people to give input. And then we also wanted to consider inviting people outside of this immediate area, like someone from Chesterfield or someone from Clayton who's had experience with the municipal court system and may be able to give another point of view. From that, we wanted to hold some community meetings where we have municipal judges as well as community partners in the room together, so that we could identify the issues as a unit and begin to understand where each one another is coming from. That's where we are so far. My plea for us to push and not just turn our head and say it's okay or we can't figure it out is one that I'm serious about, but I know it's going to take us some time to have all of those ducks in order. I'm hoping that we'll be able to call in those people who should be able to tell us who are accountable for enforcing those laws. You just don't write a law and then I just can't even wrap my mind around it. So those are the steps we have in mind. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Good. Other commissioners, Gabe.
Thank you. I want to just a couple comments. Tracy, your point you just made about the relationship between your working group, the municipal courts, and the community policing, I think there's a clear relationship, and what that relationship is that the reason why we are focusing on the municipal courts issue is because I think there's a belief that in a lot of communities like Ferguson, the most frequent contact the community has with police officers is through traffic violations and those types of encounters. And if you can improve those encounters, you can improve community relations between the police and the community. So I do think there's a good relationship there. I think it's smart that we've decided to break them out into two separate working groups, but I think we also need to keep in mind that relationship and why we're focusing on municipal courts. We're not doing it because we're focused on good government at the municipal level. We're doing it because of its impact on community relations with the police. And then my other comment, TR, I understand you gave the limitation that you're not a lawyer, but one comment I would make is at one point you said that it was clear to you that these courts do have jurisdictions over criminal matters. I believe at our meeting on this issue, we had a couple of law professors say that for them that's an issue that's very much in dispute. And I would just say that I think we should reserve judgment on those issues. We're going to do more discovery and fact-finding on those. It sounded to me like, and I'm no expert on the municipal court issue, but it sounded to me like there's a lot of complex issues here, statutory, even constitutional, and I think this, as a working group, we need to keep an open mind about those and not resolve any of those issues until we've heard from the experts.
Yeah. It's sure it's very, very complex, and there have been a number of Supreme Court cases that have spelled out that municipal courts do in fact have quasi-criminal authority. So it's very, very complex, and part of it is the civil language is retained, at the same time quasi-criminal is applied. So to say it's murky is not an unfair statement, but it does fulfill those, that is the case. We'll have more and more information that we can provide to members of the council, which clearly define that the court cases and all of that.
Rasheen, did you have a question, Rasheen?
Yeah, thank you, T.R. Carl and Commissioner T.R. Carl and Commissioner Tracy for presenting this on municipality, something that's very important and something the commission had made a statement that we're going to be very firm on this issue and take action on it. My question is, I'm not sure if it's you or the co-chairs who should answer this. I know a couple weeks ago we did say that we was going to take serious action, and we knew that several municipalities have been acting out, been exceeding the ticket revenue, and also agree with Tracy, Ms. Blackman, if T.R. Carl don't want to hop in, I'm all down with you that.
I'm not saying he doesn't want to hop in, that was a joke.
Oh, yeah, and if he, but I'm definitely agree with you on that, though. Some of these municipalities, if you've been acting out, and you shouldn't be taking in that money when you already exceeded or went over the your expectations or what you should have been doing. But I'm curious on what, so the Attorney General had sued 13 municipalities, and the two co-chairs was there. I'm just curious on where that's going, because there is some action or there's some move on some municipal courts, sir.
Yeah, so I'll try to provide some clarity about the action of the Attorney General. For a number of weeks, knowing that this issue is coming up, recognizing that we'll be discussing it, particularly in our last meeting, Rich and I had an opportunity to have some direct conversation with the Attorney General's office, first of inquiry, but then also because anybody who studies this keeps hearing this 30% come up, and there were public reports from Art City Defenders, and from which we heard from in our last meeting, and from Better Together, which we heard from, that pointed specifically to municipalities who were out of compliance. And so this issue of enforcement, and we asked the question it was difficult for Thomas Harvey to answer and others to say, well, who's responsible? Because whoever is responsible should be acting on this. So we posed that question back and said, hey, it seems like as a chief law enforcement officer in the state, you ought to be responsible or wade into this. And so we were actually pleased. What happened we were pleased that the Attorney General's office took action, which meant at some level somebody was taking responsibility. And what happened was the filing was against 13 municipalities, and I forget the breakdown, but to Commissioner Blackman's point, it was to those who had not even filed their reports. It included those who filed reports that illustrated they were over 30%. And it included those who filed reports and said they were under 30%, but the report looked like it was over 30%. And that gets to, quite frankly, the ambiguity that Commissioner Carr points out as well. But part of the issue is that the matter had not been adjudicated. And so the Attorney General is saying, we're going to step up, we're going to put this out there, we'll include these three categories. of municipalities, and we're going to have this issue adjudicated, we thought would be progress. And so, in as much as we need reform, we recognize in this space we needed enforcement. At the very, just kind of to wade into the conversation on reform. So our commitment was to stand and say, this is an appropriate act, it enforces the law, perhaps you should have been enforcing it for a while. The Attorney General got that question, what took you so long? He affirmed that it took him longer than it should have in the issue. I don't say this to take up for him, but it's to say, there was, before we get into the conversation about reform, we can't get into enforcement. We engaged him for some accountability around enforcement. We're pleased that he was in some ways responsive, and perhaps in this process, this issue will be adjudicated about what are appropriate fees, what are the percentages, and that kind of thing. There's been community pushback on some of that around two issues. So to be broadly fair about it, number one, that I believe a majority of those municipalities are predominantly African American. People have pushed back on that. And the other was that people did not feel that they had enough notice, if any notice, that the action was coming. There are various ways to respond to that. I'll let the Attorney General kind of respond on his behalf. What we have said, what I have said privately, I will say publicly, I'll continue to say, the matters responding to, we are very public about what we're discussing in these meetings. All the community is invited to these meetings and afforded opportunity to speak as appropriate. And so anyone who wanted to be a part of that or thought that we might be, community had noticed that we were looking at community at municipal courts. And we're very clear, and we've said from the beginning when we see things that seem to be actionable or conversations going on around policies, that we're not here just to fact find and study, but rather we need to weigh into the conversations. And so that was an act in that regard. And I would imagine there'll be other issues where we'll weigh in as well. So.
Now, litigation really creates issues because even then, even if the courts rule against the municipalities, enforcement still remains in question. We don't know. The law is in this case, the law is very vague. It doesn't say who enforces. I remember, I could defer to Gabe, what was the president said, the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it. Historically, if the courts rule, somebody on the administrative side has to enforce.
Yeah, let me just jump in there because I think that space is where we can be helpful because as a neutral body that is looking at this objectively and hearing from the community, hearing from municipal judges, looking at all sides, others that are in this debate come from a point of view. And they're good points of view, and we need to hear all of them, but they have a point of view. So I think you all have identified, I'm very pleased to hear you say, we need to focus on what happens, right? So what happens when, when the money goes away and what goes in its place. And really, my view of public policy is you need to have good, objective bodies that can help the legislature and the courts in this case answer that question because they're going to have great difficulty answering it. In fact, in our private conversations with the sponsor of the legislation that takes the 30% to 10%, he's asked for help. Give me some sense of what you think the appropriate reforms are and what you think ought to happen when this goes away, what the courts ought to look like. So I think your working group, I'm glad to hear you address that because there is this void. The Supreme Court has issued rules recently and posted a story this week on this question of bench warrants and what happens and this question of requiring judges to consider ability to pay. Frankly, it's incredible to me that it would take a rule of the Supreme Court to tell judges that they have to do that because it's what the law really may not on its face require them to do, but it pretty much leads them there. So you have this void between now the Supreme Court has said we can go this far, the legislature is saying we need to act, and we have identified this void about what happens. So I think your working group can do a great service to move fairly urgently to the point of what happens when this goes away.
Let me be clear, though. I don't want this to be lost. It is extremely aggressive, but I think it's valid that even though the Attorney General has filed this lawsuit, the fact that those municipal courts were operating when the law says that they could not operate means that they illegally collected funds from people from that time until this time. And I'm suggesting that even if that money had to be returned, whatever that looks like, that those municipal courts would be in danger of going away.
which I'm saying might be a good thing.
So I think, first of all, I think you're right. Second of all, I think what we're saying is, well, let me say what I'm saying. That may be, if they're found to be wrong, that will be found in the courts. So the place to enter into that conversation would be perhaps a recommendation in the same space as we speak to executive authority, we speak to judicial authority to say that this should be the outcome if they're found to be in violation. One of their, so I think that's part of it. And to be frank, pushing what we call a quo warranto action to take that authority away effectively is something that the courts could do. It's also something, it's questionable who else could do that. But this would be a step in that process. But the first thing is to say, yes, you were actually wrong, and to say there was some authority, so that would happen through the courts. The other is, I just wanted to be thoughtful in the same way about recommendations. And I say this for all of our work groups, and we'll all be on different work groups at different times. We have the capacity, and perhaps we're even called, to use this independent authority to dream and imagine what should be. But to be clear, to work to be as clear as possible about what those visions are. So if the clear vision is that courts should not be able to operate outside of the law, and we know that there will be some impact if they are caused not to operate that way, then part of the responsibility of our work groups is to construct a vision to bring back to the entire commission as to how it should operate. And so I think you're appropriately in this fact-finding space and place, considering the consequences. The key is not to allow the consequences that come from, quite frankly, entrenched constituencies to keep us from getting to the vision of a better municipal court system, municipal governance system perhaps, so that when we come back here, we're dreaming about what can be, not just caught in the consequences of reforming what is. So I think you're in that right place, and I just want to continue to encourage that we all think that way as we come back to this space.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would just like to make one comment. When we were talking about how the municipal court working group intersects with what's going on with police and community reform, and I know this is down the line looking at what the consequences are, but should the enforcement require either one, a refund of the inappropriately collected revenue, or a drastic reduction in municipal revenue that impacts budgets to the point that the municipalities are not able to function? They may have to go away. The option right now would be an unincorporated municipality, police services under the authority of St. Louis County. Am I correct? Would assume that role. But at this point, let us not remember, let's not forget that St. Louis County, this is the police force that turned tear gas and tank against the good citizens. So when we talk about the impact of these actions, I think we have to look far enough to understand what the reality may be for people in those municipalities should we get what we recommend.
So I think that's one of the consequences that we've talked about, and that's why we have to be constructive as well. I think it's only one potential scenario, and we were helped in our last meeting, and quite frankly, there's been even some work this week in the paper to talk about ways that municipalities are collaborating on different things. Commissioner Carr framed some collaboration and supports and services. So I don't know that that's the only option. What I will say is that this is an appropriate connection. I think you affirm appropriately the need to look at consequences, but also to push past the consequences to offer some alternatives for people. As we look at this connection, the other thing I want to do, with thanks to Commissioner Carr and Commissioner Blackman, is encourage all commissioners, as they have the occasion and opportunity, to engage in these work groups meetings, to be present with them as they go through these discussions and afford and engage impact as they inform their recommendations back to us, because all our perspectives will be helpful to them in their work. So we want to thank Commissioner Blackman and Commissioner Carr and affirming the intersection that has been pointed out to us by Commissioner Blackman and Commissioner Carr. We're going to invite Commissioner Isom to come up and give an update on the work group for citizen law enforcement relations. As he prepares, I also want to give real thanks and lift up and highlight again Commissioner Gore's comment that we are, and I think it's appropriate in light of the last reflection, we are looking at these municipal court operations primarily because of their impact on the citizens' first priority, which is citizen law enforcement relations. And we've heard both from police and from citizens that the courts affect how they relate to one another. So I think that's an appropriate frame for us and how we go forward and consider municipal relations as well. So Commissioner Isom.
Well, first I want to say thanks to Rich and Starsky, our co-chairs, for putting this together. We hadn't had an opportunity to hear from young people since we've started, and so the young people are really informing a lot of the decisions that we're going to be making in the future. And so what I'm presenting today is certainly not complete. This process will evolve over time as we get more input from citizens and more information becomes available. But the Citizen Law Enforcement Relations Work Group has met twice. The first meeting we had was really just introductions, trying to establish some type of framework of how we were going to move forward. We have a very good group. It falls along the lines of the three areas that we have: community policing, racial profiling, and use of force. We divided our work group up into those three subgroups based on people's expertise or based upon the areas that they were interested in. And so those three groups are working to come up with recommendations as we move forward. In terms of recommendations, we really tried to break that down into several different categories that we will be looking at moving forward. One is this legislative idea: what can we do from a statewide effort legislatively that will have an impact on citizen and law enforcement relations? As you all might know, there are a lot of bills that have already been pre-filed and will be filed in the future concerning law enforcement. And so part of our work in the work group will be to look at those bills, assess whether or not they fit with the recommendations and the charges that we have, and hopefully come up with some recommendations on what our group will support and push. So that's going to be an ongoing process. The second part is what will we recommend in terms of best practices and policy for law enforcement. That will take us researching other police departments, looking at the literature out there on law enforcement, and taking our own expertise in that area and bringing forth some recommendations to the full commission. The third part is training. A lot of discussion has been focused on training and education, not only for the community, for youth, but education and training, I think, is vital for law enforcement. In the space of education and training, a lot of that can be done through the post-commission, as I've discussed before, and it doesn't necessarily take legislation. It might not be a policy that we have to advocate. It is something that can be changed on a statewide level through the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission. And so that's the third area. And then the fourth area that we talked about, and I think the co-chairs and everyone has talked about it many times before, are metrics on how we will evaluate our success in these areas. And not only how we will evaluate success, but are there some gaps right now that we need to be looking at in terms of metrics? Is there a bigger problem in a certain area if we get more information? And so we had those four additional categories that we were looking at. So some of the things that have come out of our work group meetings, which the last of which was January 2nd, when we sat down and talked. In the area of legislation, currently one of our work group members, Karen Rosti, who is, works for the Anti-Defamation League, has done a lot of work in this area of racial profiling. She has filed bills with the state on several occasions that have not moved forward, but she gives us a template in terms of our group in terms of moving forward. And so she has disseminated that legislation to the work group, and we're in the process of reviewing that. Some of the things in her legislation that's consistent with many of the things that have been talked about are changes in how we collect information, providing more information so we could have a more robust understanding of racial profiling. So we'll be doing that. There's also a part in the legislation that says funding may be withheld if you do not provide your racial profiling statistics to the Attorney General. There was a lot of discussion in our work group about changing that from may to shall, that you shall submit this, or if you don't, you will not be able to access state funding. So there will be a lot more discussion about that in our work group and bringing some recommendations back to the full commission. The other thing that was talked about was police pedestrian stops. Within her bill, there's already a provision that talks about pedestrian stops. Of course, as we look at this incident happened as a result of a pedestrian stop, not as a result of a traffic stop. So certainly that is a major issue that we need to look at. But there are varying opinions on how this should be accomplished, meaning that from the law enforcement standpoint, they felt that if we had to record every stop, that it would be a burden on law enforcement to collect so much information. And so there was discussion about maybe it should be narrowed to Terry stops, which are reasonable suspicion stops, not stops where citizens would call and ask for someone suspicious to be stopped. So there needs to be some work done about recommendations in terms of legislative recommendations in terms of whether or not pedestrian stops will be added and how that would be crafted in the bill, and we have to do more work on that. It's come up that the Missouri statute on use of force for officers is outdated. I think everybody who has looked at it has recognized that it is. I will say that there are no law enforcement agencies who use that statute in their policies, but the fact is it is outdated. Most police departments are consistent with the Supreme Court ruling, Tennessee versus Garner, in their policies. But from the standpoint of making sure that our law is consistent and up to date, I think everybody was in agreement that that is something that we ought to advocate for, pushing for in terms of a change in state law. There are already some bills out there that are moving in that direction, and I don't think we're going to get a lot of pushback from that in any area. The other area that we've been focusing on a lot, as I said, is training. There's still a lot of work to be done with that, disseminating the curriculum for peace officers in the state and reviewing that and seeing whether or not we want to make some recommendations on changes in that. We haven't done that. But we have focused on this continuing education piece, thinking about increasing the hours in terms of continuing education. Right now, as I told you before, there are 48 hours of continuing education that is mandated for law enforcement over a 3-year period. We have talked about increasing that number, or at least recommending that that number be increased. And I think the biggest thing is how specific we're going to get about our recommendations. What areas do we think officers need to increase their training in? Not just giving some kind of broad recommendation of another 48 hours, but what specifically in those 48 hours do we feel, or does the community feel, we ought to be addressing in terms of continuing education. One area that we are moving forward on right now, both with the commission and both in my job as the public safety director, is this issue of use of force. training. Pedestrian stop training, traffic stop training, use of force training that focuses on areas of communication, de-escalation, tactics, is something that we are going to move forward on. Hopefully recommending that police departments do biannual training, 4 hours a year, that would focus on car stops, pedestrian stops, use of force, communication. I think we all feel that that is a good direction to move forward. So there is a lot more work to be done in terms of overall training and also recommendations on continuing education training. The other area that we have focused on in terms of training is this issue of racial profiling, bias-based policing. How specific do we want to get in terms of curriculum and things that we believe that police departments ought to be addressing in that type of training? Right now, it's required that police departments do 3 hours of training in a 3-year period. That's not 3 hours every year or 1 hour every year. That's 3 hours in a 3-year period. So you could have 3 hours at the end of that 3-year period. So we're having discussions about, you know, what that should look like, how specific we ought to be about training in those areas, and I think we have some good people who will provide some recommendations on that. I think even from officer standpoint, they want that training to be meaningful. They don't want to just go in a room and spend an hour in the room. That's useless. So that's even what I'm hearing from the law enforcement side, is that if we can somehow make this a meaningful training where I can actually get some benefit out of it, then there will be some positive takeaways from it. The other area that we talked about in terms of metrics is this issue of officer-involved shootings. And do we have a good picture of what is going on from a local level and a statewide level? Right now, no one really is aware of any data that really gives us a picture of officer-involved shootings throughout the state. And so we are moving and working with the state to see if we can start to put some metrics in place where we will have some maybe statewide reporting on use of force, officer-involved shootings. That way we can start to track how often are unarmed people shot, how many rounds do officers fire, you know, what are the characteristics of these encounters, and looking at that going forward, having information about that going forward. So that's an area that we are moving forward in right now. Actually, Rick Rosenfeld and Dave Klinger have actually submitted to me some data points that they thought would be appropriate for such a report, and the collection of information. We will continue to add to that and move forward in that direction. Many young people, and in many of our sessions, there's been talk about accountability. Our discussions in terms of accountability centered around this issue of licensing, certification, accreditation of law enforcement agencies. Of course, right now, there is no licensing of a law enforcement agency. There are voluntary accreditation bodies. CALEA is one, and there is the Missouri Police Chiefs Association. There's a lot of discussion about, you know, how would you go about licensing an agency? And then more importantly, if you did that, how would you do oversight of it? What is the accountability measures for putting something like that in place? So the discussion centered around more incentives to be accredited, licensing, not that we have not dismissed licensing, but licensing of 600 police departments and sheriff's departments in the state of Missouri. I think we have to recognize that that would take a new department, State Department. And so that's the reality. It would take a lot of money to do that right. And so if we want to make a recommendation, we want to make sure we make a recommendation that has the chance of working, right? So I think those are things to consider. But this accountability piece in terms of licensee certification is still something that we're working through. There are other areas in terms of accountability. People have talked about citizens review boards, body cameras. We haven't had a lot of discussion about that, but we will as we move forward and as we get more information, we will talk about those issues in terms of accountability. The other area that we've addressed so far is recruiting in our area. And we've talked about a number of different programs that are existing right now, like Police Explorers. There was a program in the past called the Cadet Program, which started in schools, high schools, went to college, paid for students' college, and they had part-time jobs in law enforcement agencies, and it was a bridge from high school, college into law enforcement. So there's been discussion about that. But there was also discussion in terms of metrics, right? And saying, how are we going to collect this information and know whether we're doing well? And there was also a discussion to say, is it really a big problem? Because there are some agencies who actually are diverse, right? So University City is very diverse police department, and they've been able to do it. And so part of the discussion is, should we just create a report that shows that it is possible to have a diverse police department, and then give best practices on how you go about accomplishing that. Really kind of expose the fact that it can be done. And there are police departments that are doing it right now. So more work needs to be done in that area. So the topic that we haven't had as much detail on is this issue of community policing. Is that a legislative issue? Is it a policy issue? Is it training? We really need to do more work in that topic or on that topic. And so that's where we are right now with the Citizen Law Enforcement Relations Work Group.
The questions from commissioners? Commissioner Gore.
Hi, Commissioner Isom. I have a question on the Tennessee versus Gardner, the statutory issue you were talking about on the use of deadly force statute. So I know that there's a few use of deadly force statutes that have been put forward that attempt to deal with the statute substantively, making changes to, making kind of wholesale changes to the statute. I think those will get very bogged down and be very difficult to deal with. But on the narrow issue of just bringing our existing statute into compliance with the Supreme Court's holding in Tennessee versus Gardner, my understanding is that would just require that we take out the part of the statute that says basically you can use deadly force to shoot a fleeing felon. Right. Which in some instances that could be somebody who is guilty of stealing $150.
Right.
Is there a statute pending right now or put out there that just deals with that narrow issue and doesn't deal with the statute substantively?
I'm not sure if it's a statute out there that narrowly deals with that portion of the law, but you're right. That's the main issue, is that the statute still reflects the ability for officers to shoot a fleeing felon. And not a dangerous felon, and not someone who is an immediate threat to you or a citizen. And so I think that's the way it's ultimately going to be crafted, is to remove that portion and to deal with that issue narrowly, as opposed to some of the sort of broader changes that people want to make.
Thank you.
I just want to make sure I'm clear. Is that something that is currently in process? Do you know of legislators developing that as it currently stands? And if so, is that something that perhaps your committee would be prepared to bring a recommendation at our next meeting to the commission on whether we should engage in that discussion directly?
Yeah, I think it will be. I think all of us agreed in the meeting that it needed to be changed. There needed to be more discussion about what that looked like, right? I don't know that everybody was comfortable with saying specifically what they would, agree to in terms of the change. But I think if we start to get some language, which the next work group, we will bring some of those bills in. Actually, Kevin is doing the research on all the bills that have been filed that are police related. So we will bring those back to the work group and try to work through that process of bringing back a recommendation.
Good deal. Other questions?
I have one quick question. Have we thought about, or are we looking into the practice of how we quantify our police officers' performance? Because being a police officer for 33 years, numbers always seem to be the only quantitative. I've even heard officers say you don't get a check mark for giving a break.
So this goes to Pastor Blackman's point. We have talked about these big ideas of how do you evaluate community policing? How do you evaluate whether or not there are better relationships between law enforcement and the community? A lot of those are not hard numbers. They're more qualitative assessment of an officer's performance, and they're not traditional. They're not, you wrote 3 tickets, you had 5 arrests, crime went down. It's more of how did you feel about this interaction? So we started to have discussions about that. It's a really complex topic, as you know, and we've discussed. But I think that is part of our charge in terms of thinking about innovative ways to reward and assess officers that are not the traditional ways. Because traditionally you do get rewarded for producing numbers, producing arrests. We know that's not the entire component of the job, but it's very important to how you get the job done.
Are there others? If not, I'm going to be redundant. Go ahead, Scott.
I have just a comment on the certification of police force. I know you indicated that that is a large issue, expensive issue, but just coming from the private sector and knowing the issues I face with certification, and they all have been very positive, looking particularly in the trucking industry, which we're involved in, where we were 30 years ago and where we are today as far as safety, accountability, and improvement is dramatic, and that all came through a certification process. And it has changed the industry for the better. And there's standards now that everyone is expected and has to, I guess, be in compliance with. Certification does work.
Yes.
And it took 30 years to get where we are today, and it's a process. And I would just encourage us to look at some type of certification or standard, because I question whether a police department with 2 people in it is really a police department. How well can they police? And I guess one of the comments we heard around our business during the situation where police officers were working 12 hours on and 12 hours off, our truck drivers aren't allowed to do that, and all they're doing is driving trucks. I mean, had police officers under the stress they were, working 12 hours on and 12 hours off, and due to, legal reasons, our drivers can't even do that because of safety concerns. So I think there are some certification issues that should be looked into.
Yeah, I want to, I know we're way over time, but I do want to, on this point, and as we make transition and close, I'll be slightly redundant and encouraging at the same time. Number one, to say, the community has asked us for bold transformational recommendations. And so if the committee believes that the way, no matter the difficulty of the path, if the committee believes that the way is certification, then I say that the committee's recommendation needs to at least reflect that belief, even if another path is encouraged as well, that belief should be reflected. The other thing I want to note is that, particularly, Chief, based upon your work, your Eisenhower Fellowship around community policing, I know this is an area that the work group hadn't done a lot of work around yet, but this is something you feel passionately about. You've researched significantly, and you may be better positioned than anyone. I'm a preacher, so I engage in hyperbole. Anyone in the nation, because of what has gone on here, because of your work, because of your credentialing, to paint a picture of what it should look like, not only for our community and for our state, but perhaps for the nation. So I encourage you to begin to paint that picture. And to have the work group maybe begin to help you with that, but give them something to begin with based upon the ideals, your research, and your experience, and that becomes a place to work from as well.
I agree.
Thank you. So we are, with thanks to Chief Isom. We are well over our time, but we do want to just give some guidance for the way ahead. You've heard already, with thanks to all of you who are patient, caring, and committed enough to stay with us throughout this time. On January 20th at 5 p.m., we are set to gather again, where we'll be focusing on education and child well-being, really an extension of the conversation that we have had on today, and we will be able to do that in an evening format. We are at the, is it Westview? Westview Middle School in the Riverview Gardens School District. Information on that will be posted to our website. We encourage each of you to check back to stlpositivechange.org for data, information, and capturing of resources from this meeting, and encourage you to share the word for others to join us on January 20th. Thanks again to all of our commissioners for your great preparation, engagement up to this point, and for the leadership and guidance you provide us on the way ahead. On the next meeting, we can celebrate having our managing director actually officially on board, and we look forward to doing that. The next meeting is also scheduled on the birthday of Commissioner Blackman, and she has let us know that gifts will